Ready to go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our June meeting for the Free Press Book Club. My name is Erin Lebar. I am your book club admin, and we are here tonight to discuss Life in the City of Dirty Water by Clayton Thomas-Muller. Before we move on, I would like to acknowledge that Clayton, Niigaan, Chris, and myself are all based on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota people, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I will do a quick round of introductions. So we have columnist Niigaan Sinclair from the Winnipeg Free Press making his second book club appearance. So thank you so much for being here tonight. We have our author, Clayton Thomas-Muller. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us this evening to talk about your book. And we have Chris All, co-owner of McNally Robinson. Our meeting will move as it usually does with introduction and a reading from Clayton. And then we will move on to the Q&A, and then we'll talk about our summer book at the end of the evening. So with that, I will throw to Chris to do his introduction.
Thank you, Erin. So I get to hear about books about 6 months before they are published. It's sometimes difficult for new titles to stand out because I get literally inundated with hundreds. I see them briefly and they all start to look the same in some ways, but something about Life in the City of Dirty Water certainly caught my attention right away. I immediately knew that the city in question was Winnipeg, so that's enough to get my attention anyway. But I didn't recognize Clayton's name, so I had a look at his author photo, and of course, I immediately thought, who's this fellow with this mischievous grin who calls himself a warrior? I didn't have to get very far into the book before I realized it was going to be something special. It has a frenetic pace, it's packed with events, and at first, this means learning about a childhood where he's subjected to treatment that no child should ever have to face. But then as an adult, it's clear that Clayton accomplishes more in about half a day than I can claim in a week. His energy leaps from the page. But it also has passages of reflection that are impressive in their ability to bring a lot of ideas together in a few sentences. One example that really struck me, it's on page 12, so very early on. And within about 10 sentences, Clayton describes his great-grandparents dying, his mother and her siblings falling apart, and how that severed his contact with the land. In other words, a specific case of a generational pain of Indigenous community combined with the loss of contact with the land, all done matter-of-factly within just a very few sentences. And these are moments that, as a reader, I just thought I was getting so many insights about the effect of colonialism had on families like Clayton's. There's so many details to take off from this book. I took a lot of notes as I read. I have a lot of questions. I'll have to control myself. But to get as many as possible, I'll close off so we can get started. To do that, I will ask Clayton Thomas-Muller to read from Life in the City of Dirty Water.
Wow, thank you so much for that really beautiful introduction, Chris, and thank you so much to McNally Robinson and the Winnipeg Free Press and their book club, and of course Niigaan for inviting me to come be a part of our evening together. Before I get into my reading, I'm going to read from I think it's chapter 170 something. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my mentors, former Grand Chief Phil Fontaine. But yeah, I wanted to just quickly sing a song just to kind of bring spirit into this virtual space. And before I get into it, just also wanted to acknowledge in a good way, this beautiful territory that our great city, was birthed from. This Treaty 1 territory, all the nations here, the Métis Nation, and of course, all the ancestors' graves that our city's built upon. So yeah, I'll sing a quick song and then I'll jump right into it. Oh, get to pick Okay, let's see here. For my reading, from page, oh geez, I gotta get those glasses. Page 179 is where I'm gonna read from. During my time as the executive director at Aboriginal Youth with Initiative, Phil Fontaine, the former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations, was a valued mentor in my life. The Assembly of First Nations, formerly known as the National Indian Brotherhood, is the constitutionally recognized national Aboriginal organization representing First Nations governments and their lobby agenda with the settler colonial state of Canada. Today, under the leadership, well, formally, it's not today, obviously, under the leadership of Chief Perry Bellegarde, for the first time in the history of the organization, it is in alignment with the conservative agenda of the Government of Canada. Phil taught me how to look 4 steps ahead. He is a controversial character with his pragmatic approach to negotiating deals with the federal government. Some of the more radical sectors of Indian country see him as a sellout. To me, he's more like an uncle who's done some crazy things, but has also done some really good things. The work he did as national chief, such as bringing the discourse around residential school to the national consciousness, which resulted in the apology from the federal government, that was significant. I worked with the national chief for many years as the founder of the Assembly of First Nations National Youth Council and found myself being groomed by him for politics. During Phil's first run as national chief and his first administration, I was the national youth spokesperson of the Assembly of First Nations. I came up with strategies to get the National Youth Council off government funding so that I could become more radicalized and actually begin to address the fundamental issues that are keeping our people down. The plan was to center on suicide prevention and gang intervention in Aboriginal land claims and treaties, including the comprehensive land claims process and the modern day treaty negotiation process. All of these claims are centered in extinguished policy frameworks aimed at eliminating our unique collective priority rights as the first peoples of this land. Things that don't get funded by the federal government. The Assembly of First Nations thought that my proposal was too radical. Phil Fontaine said, "No, you can't do that. You're going to water down our treaty rights. You're going to make our transfer payments less if you do that." And he said that the transfer payments the AFN received for its bread and butter programs would be diminished. I said, "You could just put that government money in an account and we'll do what we will with that. Because it's the Canadian government's fiduciary and legal obligation to give us that money." I was told by various sources that Phil had written a letter to every chief, provincial and territorial organization in the country that essentially said, "Don't work with this kid. He's a shit disturber." I told Phil, "You can hit me like that. You can cut me off from the Assembly of First Nations National Youth Council that I helped create. But I'm going to go away for a while, and I'll come back with an independently funded network, and we're going to carry on this conversation from where we left off." Years later, here I am tangling with my old mentor. Today, he runs a consulting firm that provides services for clients like TransCanada Corporation. One of the services he provides is arranging letters of accommodation from First Nations and Métis communities to lend their support to projects like the Energy East pipeline. He also works for the Royal Bank of Canada as a special Indigenous advisor to help the bank and First Nations expand the Aboriginal market. During that time that Phil Fontaine's consulting firm was retained by TransCanada, Our campaign successfully terminated both the Keystone XL and Energy East pipelines. So I felt vindicated. Fighting the pipeline was the right thing to do, but it also felt great on a personal level, as though I had been right all along to part ways with Phil. But that kind of victory can never be complete. It is a loss to all of us that someone of Phil's stature had diminished, just as we were worse off without Mary Richard. We should all be working together. Ta-da!
Thanks so much for that. And Niigaan, are you ready to start the Q&A portion of the evening?
Great. Yep. So it's nice to see everybody. So Bojun did Magadaduk, Niigaan Webadam Nadishna Cost. You can hear me okay, everybody?
Mhm.
I have my mic going. I have my cat here beside me. Actually, my cat quite appreciated the song. So miigwech to Clayton, who Clayton, I think this is how many times for us? This is a fourth time that we're going to talk about the book.
I think it's getting up there. Yeah. 3 or 4 for sure.
So it's nice to be here, and especially nice to be on behalf of the Free Press, who you all know. I'm a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. It's nice to see everybody, or see everybody anyways, that are out there supporting the Free Press Book Club. And a huge thanks to Erin for all the great work that she does, and of course Chris with McNally Robinson, and the great work that they do to support myself and all of my books as well, and just a wonderful, we're so lucky to have such a great bookstore, and to have a newspaper that's willing to invest in books. And so really appreciate that. I think we're one of the few newspapers in the country that still have a very active and lively book section. And so, big kudos to the Free Press. I mean, a little biased, of course, but I really believe in the work of literature. So Clayton, here we are again. I don't know if anyone knows this, but Clayton and I are friends for I don't know, I'm going to say about a decade now, and we've been in the same circles, and we didn't grow up together per se, but certainly I think we were in Manitoba at the same time, certainly in different communities, different locations, but weirdly enough followed some quite similar paths. You lived in Brandon, I lived in Brandon. You're from way north Manitoba. I'm from the Interlake, which is north of Winnipeg anyways. And grew up in Selkirk, and a little bit of time in Ashern and Moosehorn and Peguis and so on. And then, of course, you kind of traveled internationally, which I've traveled a lot internationally, especially around my high school years, off to South Africa. But you're off to Germany, and during your upbringing and other things that you've done in your climate action work. So in so many different ways, we've had different lives, but yet somewhat connected. And we've done this event now talking about this book for our department colloquium, also for a few other events that we've done, and your book launch. I was involved with the initial book launch. And so it's an honor to be here yet again. And I wore my honorable Cree Scoden shirt for you today.
Right on.
There's so much we can talk about with this book, and what haven't we covered with this book, but I've tried to pick a few different things. I really appreciate that you've shared that passage tonight, because most of our other book launches that we've done, we've talked a lot about your upbringing, and I want to reflect upon that for just a moment here, because I think it's important, because it's the first thing that you see in the book. This book is about your life, and it's about the frankly, good, bad, great, ugly, all the different experiences that you've had in growing up in Winnipeg, but Manitoba, as a young Cree man, as a person who's a father and a brother and an uncle to so many of us. And can you talk a little bit about how important it was to have your mother write the initial foreword for this book, because she doesn't come off all the time that great. And she certainly is, while incredible activist herself, instilled so much resilience and love within you. It is somewhat, I was reading it today and going, it's so amazing that she wrote this forward, but she doesn't, she does come off at times to, people could criticize your mother for lots of ways. And you want to just talk a little bit about how important that was to include your mother at the start of this book?
Yeah. I mean, I think my mom would be the kind of central pillar to, as far as, the spirit of what I was trying to capture in my process of writing Life in the City of Dirty Water. Consent was like a super huge theme You know, and I did my best to reach out to people that I mentioned in the memoir. And you know, if they wanted me to change their names, you know, I was happy to do so. If they really were adamant they didn't want my story, that me to share them in the stories that I shared, you know, I tried to accommodate as many of those conversations and to like really move forward with that permission, you know. And I think the most important out of all of the people I talked to, of course, was my mother. um, you know, my mom and I, you know, have been roommates actually for the last, you know, 2.5 years since the pandemic started. Unfortunately, my son's mother and I separated right before the pandemic, and rather than be all by myself and, you know, depressed and alone, my mom had a spare room, and so, you know, we've been living together. And there was a lot of silver linings that came through being with her and sharing a home together. And you know, during the final stages of getting my book to market, you know, just final editing, recording the audio book, you know, there was still quite a few things I was doing, you know, to complete this project. You know, and her and I, you know, we had many late night conversations about, you know, the silver linings to this moment that we found ourselves in. You know, one of them was that, you know, my kids could be in a Cree immersion kind of language nest environment, when, you know, I get my kids have to, you know, a couple nights a week. And you know, my grandmother, she just passed away last month, was living with us for the last couple of years as well. And so they would sit up all night and drink tea and talk in Cree, and you know, and I could run ideas by them, and my boys could talk to them and learn the language. And so we referred to this time as the project, you know, the project, in talking about trauma and our families, you know, how our family's been affected by residential school and all of that, you know, and just the ongoing, you know, legacy of just the ramifications of not having land, you know, living in cash poverty in the inner city, and what that does, you know, to the hundreds of cousins I have and the hardships that they face. And so, yeah, you know, I really wanted her permission, you know, to share some of these really deeply connected experiences that I had with her on this journey of life, because she was just a child when she had me. She was 16. And you know, and we kind of grew up together, you know. And so yeah, it was really important that she would give me that permission. And I didn't get consent from everybody, you know. Like, this book was very much about calling out like all of the failed fathers in my life, you know, naming a lot of their failures. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think I was really struggling with forgiving my mother, you know, for her own shortcomings in an impossible circumstance of being a single mother and raising a kid in Canada, you know, in the late 70s and early 80s, you know, like that. Those are tough times to be a young Native woman, going to university, working full time, and raising a kid by yourself. And so it's no wonder shit went down, and sometimes bad things happened, you know. And it's no wonder that, you know, she went through some phases too in her 20s when, you know, she partied, you know, she partied hard, she did her school hard, and, you know, she got her degrees, and she got a degree in nursing. But it was tough for her, you know. And so I get it as an adult now, and we talk about it, you know, all the time, about our life and about how, you know, cycles of negative abuse and just trauma in our family, you know, we're going to do our best to make this stuff end with us. So that it's not to say that the little ones that are coming up right now, including my sons Felix and Jackson, aren't going to face monsters as they go out into the world, but they're not going to. I don't want them to inherit their father's, you know, monsters in the way that I've inherited my father's. You know, my father died, you know, at 58, you know, from cirrhosis of the liver. He drank himself to death. And you know, and it's really too bad, because in my research into who he was, you know, I mean, aside from my own personal relationship with him, a lot of people told me they thought he was going to be the one, you know, to lead our nation, Pugatawaga, and, you know, to really change things. And he did in his own way. For behind the scenes, you know, Peter Sinclair Sr., you know, any old dogs out there watching might know that name. but yeah, it really ended up being a very kind of cathartic process of coming to terms with like some of the feelings I had towards my mother, especially around, some of the abuse that I went through at her hands and at the hands of other people when she wasn't able to watch me, when she was, working full time or at school. I was what they called a latchkey kid in the 80s. So
Yeah, you talk a lot about, I mean, okay, I kind of gave you a heads up here when we were talking earlier today that um, something I overlooked or I've overlooked in the past, but it's really struck me now is there is this tiny story. It's one of the smallest little sections. It's maybe 2 paragraphs, maybe 3. And it's on page 20. And it talks about your favorite hero. And that so much about this book involves 2 major themes. The first is male role models, or the failure of those male role models, or coming into those male role models. In many ways, you encapsulate all the different male role models in your life, from your cousins to your nephews, or to your uncles, to Harry, to a little bit of Roddy at times too. I mean, all these different figures that have come in. And so hearing about your hero was the Incredible Hulk. I mean, the story of the Incredible Hulk is to turn from a mild-mannered man to this beast, or having that we all have this beast within us and we transform. And of course, it's triggered by rage. And, so much of this book can talk a little bit about just grappling with that rage or grappling with that anger, as you talked about. But also grappling with other things too. I mean, there's so many things that would be personified as rage, but are not rage, which is, your own sexuality, your own identity as an activist. Some of the stuff you talked about with Phil is sort of encapsulating what kind of activism am I going to do? Am I going to do a mainstream kind of AFN? Am I going to do something altogether new? You want to just talk a little bit about the book itself is split up into 5 sections for any of you, the readers that aren't out there. So the 5 sections are flight, warrior, water, healing, and then finally fire. But that first section of flight is kind of like, it's the most brutal section, I think. It has some of the most hardest parts to read, but yet you're talking about flying. You're talking about transforming and growing into this person who will later work for the Manitoba Warriors, but do his best to. You want to talk a little bit about transformation, or your transformation? We also have some readers from questions from readers too. So
yeah, the Incredible Hulk. I'm sorry, you just totally blew me away there, Niigaan, with your own takeaways. I mean, that's really cool when I talk to people who've read the memoir, because these are lived experiences, right? Like, this is a story about a Cree guy that grew up in the West End of Winnipeg, and at the end of the day, no matter, I've lived a very exceptional life, and I acknowledge that, and I'm very grateful for the life that I've lived, and all the experiences, and especially the relationships and the connection to the beautiful places that I've been able to travel. But, I think for me, writing this book, was very much, oh, geez, I was so naive when I started. It came out of a place of therapy. Actually, I was talking to my therapist about this problem I was having, with my kids, especially. I kept blinking out, just kind of like I'd be playing, and then I just kind of go and just stare off into space. And it got to be such a bad issue that their mother actually, because I would do it to her too, she'd be talking to me mid-conversation and I'd just be like, and, so I talked to my therapist about it, and he was like, oh, well, it's really common actually for, people who are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder to exhibit patterns of dissociative behavior. It's a very common, indicator of PTSD. And in your case, of intergenerational Indian residential school syndrome. And, so it's common for survivors of Indian residential school, or for the children of survivors of Indian residential school, to, get triggered by the children, because, when you look at your kids, no matter what age they are, they're like mirrors, and they reflect back what you went through at that particular age. And so your fight or flight, reaction is constantly going off, which puts you into this like, kind of instinctual, reactionary kind of survival mode where you're not able to ever relax, and where you can do things like blank out and be disassociative, or get heavy into the drink or drugs, or become a workaholic. There's a lot of ways that trauma manifests. And so, and so when I asked him, like, what do I do about it? He said, well, you should, when you get triggered, you should write about it, and, and write about like what triggered you, and then write about what it made you think about, and then if you're really up to it, maybe write about the conditions that might have existed to maybe that wouldn't have happened, if the right conditions had existed, that traumatic event. And so I did write a book, and it was like way too fucked up to publish. I would have re-traumatized a shit ton of people that I love, including my mother, and I had to go back to the drawing board and come up with a completely different approach. And so I asked my filmmaker bro, Spencer Mann, who actually co-directed Life in the City of Dirty Water, the short doc, which everybody can watch on CBC Gem for free. It's part of the whole 3-dimensional storytelling universe of Life in the City of Dirty Water. And I said to him, yo, you're always traveling with me to all these protests and stuff, and we're making all these little protest movies and shit all the time. Why don't you record me talk, kind of in that Indian way, like as an orator, in that oral history kind of way, the customary way of Indigenous peoples as a storyteller, to talk about what it's like to grow up Indigenous in an inner city of the settler colonial state of Canada, in my case, Winnipeg, And he said, yeah, man, that sounds really great. Like that, let's do it. And so we did that. And after many, many months of that, of storytelling and, whatnot, I was able to take the audio from that video recording and to pipe that through the Google tool, voice to text tool, which spit out the actual manuscript, which we then could work with and edit. It wasn't perfect. We had to edit it, but for those like myself that get challenged with sitting down and actually handwriting out or typing out, your manuscript, there are technological things that can help you now, that can speed up the process or lend you a hand. But, so, I went through a long, elaborate process that I ain't going to get into on this talk, but at the end of the day, it took 7 years to write this memoir, to get it to market, to go through a big editing process with a huge team of incredible people that eventually came together to make this book happen, including the folks at Penguin and at my agency, Transatlantic Agency, and, even at the publishing houses like Page 2 Publishing in Vancouver. The team there really opened a lot of doors for me. And it was like a really intense process. And going through the process of writing the book was really difficult as well, because I really had to kind of turn on a lot of my old support networks that I had created, through historical career burnouts and battles against substance dependency, alcohol in particular. And I had to turn those networks back on, because writing this book, I had to face my darkest and most, terrible like traumas, and to try to normalize talking about these things like that, so that other people could maybe get inspired to be able to talk about their things. Because, the only way through this mess, like through the violent history of Canada's colonization and the way that disproportionately impacts Indigenous peoples, and that it continues to in neo-colonial forms to this day, colonization hasn't ended. It's the same story, just different players. Going through that process, though, was a complete deconstruction of myself, and I'm still going through the process of rebuilding, the kind of human that I want to be moving forward for the next phase in my life, because I'm 45 now, and I just want to approach, work life, spiritual responsibility, and playtime balance in a more sustainable way. Because I think right up till this memoir came out, my life was like this, and I want it to be like this.
Yeah, I mean, so much of your work involves. I think most of us know you now, and what do we know? We know somebody who's dedicated to the earth, someone who's dedicated to climate action, and then most importantly, just dedicated to accountability and ethics amongst everybody around. And having been in different both collaborations and perhaps collisions at times that we've had together. I mean, it's certainly interesting to see so much of the backstory around leading you to who you are, and so you're sort of seeing where the kernels of that ethics and that responsibility. I want to talk about that in just a minute, but I do have a reader question here for you from one of our readers at the Free Press, who's asking you that about the book jacket. So they say the book jacket is fantastic. Thank you for this heartbreaking yet inspiring story of your life. Can you tell us a little bit about how you chose, or what was the way in which this book jacket was selected? And can you hold it up for a second just so that people can see? Those of you that don't have a copy of the book there. It's a beautiful, reminds me a lot of Christy Belcourt's work. And I can't remember who is the artist. Do you actually say who the artist is in there?
Oh yeah, it's in the sleeve, and it is Christy Belcourt.
Oh, it is Christy. Yes, of course.
Yeah. No, Christy and one of her friends that she works very closely with, Isaac Murdoch, who just dropped a new album, by the way. Everybody's got to get his album. It's insane. Like it's just Keep It in the Ground, the song Keep It in the Ground, and the song Indian Song. Oh my God. So I had approached Christy and Isaac years ago, actually, during the height of the Energy East campaign. You know, the industry was trying to build the biggest pipeline ever from Alberta to the Atlantic Canada. You know, I mean, they'll build a pipeline to the moon if they'll let them. But so we were in a big scrap with them. That was right during Standing Rock. So I had invited an artist friend of mine, the younger brother, actually, to the journalist Rebecca Solnit, Dave Solnit. And he's this badass artist that literally, if you've gone to any global protest in the last 20 years, chances are he's the one who painted it. He's this amazing movement carpenter, painter, artist person. And I brought him to Winnipeg because during that campaign, we had acquired a totem pole. It was gifted from the Lummi Nation, I believe. One of the nations in Washington State had donated this totem pole to be placed in the pathway of the proposed Energy East pipeline, and it traveled all the way across the states through Standing Rock and up here to Manitoba. And when it arrived in Winnipeg, we were going to have a big march, welcome the totem pole, and the late elder Dave Kershane had kindly offered as a home for this beautiful totem pole the Turtle Lodge in Saugeen First Nation is the permanent home. So you can go actually see this totem pole, you know, at the Turtle Lodge in Saugeen outside of Winnipeg. But we were like, well, how the hell are we going to let the city know that this is happening? And so we created this 24-hour art space where people could come and paint all night, all day, listen to music. You know, we've had pizza delivered, and we made banners, and that's where we printed the first run of Thunderbird Woman. Many of you might have seen the Thunderbird Woman with the heart on her chest at many of the climate protests across the planet. And that came from Christy and Isaac's art shop. And they did the first run here, which we sent hundreds of these flags down to Standing Rock for protests, and they were part of the Main Street welcoming of this totem pole. Needless to say, we had a deep relationship there. And so when this book, came around, I had asked, and the film too, I asked them if they could design the theatrical poster to the film, Life in the City of Dirty Water. And that's the graphic that you see on the last page, which Isaac Murdoch was kind enough to create. That's the theatrical poster image. And then, of course, Christy did the book cover artwork. So, yeah, and, our ancestors love beauty. They love color. They love, things to be beautiful. And so I really wanted to make sure that even though there's a lot of really painful things in this book, painful reflections and memories and that, there's also great beauty in that and healing. And so it was very important to me that the cover represented that. And, Christy and Isaac are probably some of the most luminous contemporary Indigenous artists who have ever existed. And so to have them be a part of this project was very, very powerful and humbling, and I'm forever in their debt.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, uh, it's a remarkable cover, and I love, like, I want to get to another reader question, but I want to throw my question in there, so we're going to do a combo here. The reader question that I'll just read it for a little bit here. It says, "You tell your story so well, calm and composed, almost matter of factly, like this is normal." And I think inferring that a lot of the events maybe are not normal for a lot of people. And I think certainly knowing the readership of the Free Press, a lot of them wouldn't have experience joining the Manitoba Warriors, at the very beginning stages of what that. By the way, I think it's very interesting for you readers out there. You can get a birth story of what the Manitoba Warriors started with. Like, we often hear about it as a gang of violence, but it actually started out with a youth employment program for guys coming out of jail. And so, I mean, I think that's a really important little story that's important in that. But anyways, my soapbox moment there. I guess for a lot of Indigenous peoples living with generational trauma stemming from the residential school system, it is that these stories sometimes that you're telling are an Indigenous normal. Do you see this cycle breaking? Do you see a light at the end of this very long, dark tunnel that Canada has been mired into, or putting Indigenous peoples into? I want to add a little addendum to this question. On page, I believe it's 79, I had it written down over here. On page 79, 75, there is this beautiful quote that you have. And it's you say, saving yourself means only something if you save the world, or saving yourself means saving the world. And that, I think, is the hinge point in the book, where you start turning towards the realization that so much of our lives that have led us to violence, that have led us to gangs, that have led men to leave their homes, or mentor young men into gangs, or just generally into drugs and alcohol addiction, has been about land theft. And do you see things changing? And do you see this cycle? That's what our reader's asking. Do you see the cycle breaking?
Well, I actually think your father was talking about that, just like in the last year or two, somewhere in the media. I saw him talk about that, about our young people today, and how, just incredibly intelligent they are, and how they're really not going to put up with the kind of bullshit that previous generations have been dealing with. And that can go a lot of different ways. And, and this isn't a veiled threat. It's just reality, like, people think it's really crazy that I'm not, unstable, that I'm raising kids and I hold a job and all of that, having gone through some of the things that I've gone through. But, what's really important to understand about this memoir is that I really tried to capture the collective experiences that we go through as Native folks, that our families go through in the current economic system that this country operates under, which is inextricably linked to the process of dispossession, to the process of suppressing our collective rights as Indigenous peoples, and the process of molesting and interfering with our connection and our, community self-determination over our land and waters. And that's why we're cash broke. Natives are not broke because we're just lazy, or all the negative statistics that people hear about through well-funded government and private sector propaganda. We're cash broke, and I don't like saying poor because we're not poor. We're cash broke because we're not able to leverage any resources, because the government keeps screwing with us. And the private sector is in on it, and the banks that finance them are in on it, because the entire system will fundamentally fail if Indigenous peoples side of treaties, of agreements, if our inherent rights are respected. The current economic paradigm is just not possible. And so, I think for me, when I write about these things and I talk about these things, as a matter of fact, it's because it is. And the utility of doing that is so that people can normalize talking about things like sexual abuse, like children getting molested, so that people can talk about domestic violence, about partners, being violent to their families, so that people can talk about, the fact that Indigenous women represent over 50% of the federal prison population, are the fastest rising prison demographic. Like, this shit is real. And this is the stuff that Native people collectively are dealing with, on top of everything else that everybody's dealing with, and the pandemic and all these things. Like, we're also dealing with mass trauma events, that the frequency of which is increasing because of the recession, and poor people are always hit first and hardest during times of recession. And I think that's the big thing, and I think the number one thing I want to bring up is the tens of thousands of unmarked graves of these little children that are finally finding their way back home, from the over 130 Canadian residential schools. They've only checked about 20 something of them. There's still over 100 left. This is terrifying. This is a horrific mass trauma event that's happening, that Native people are dealing with. So if you know a Native person, they've definitely got an auntie or a mother or a sister that's murdered, and that's on that list of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And they definitely have, if they didn't go themselves, they have a mother or a father that went to Indian residential school, if not both. And so we have to deal with what the right has done really well, which is to create such a polarized environment in the political ecosystem of this country that there is no compromise, and there is no moving through it. And at the end of the day, that's the only thing we can do to get through this shit, is we got to move through it. There is no walking around it, digging under it, or flying above it. We have to move through this shit.
Yeah.
Come out on the other side.
So also, though, and I think with this book, I mean, you do call people to that, and I just want to share a reader response here. A reader response says, Truth and Reconciliation has brought us closer to understanding the issues that our Indigenous peoples face. There's the "our" thing, but anyways. It is one thing to learn and acknowledge, but what other action should we be taking above and beyond the TRC calls to action? Thank you for discussing and sharing your story. You're an inspiration. So, I mean, you've called it, right? Like you've said, we've got to face these issues together. We've got to be brave. But, the one thing that this book, just as I was reading it today, went, yeah, here it is again. And I've asked you about this at every launch that we've talked about, and it needs to be spoken about again, is this book is really about you learning to love yourself. And loving, or just learning maybe just the concept of love, because so much of love was the one thing that maybe the opportunity to love, or to learn healthy love or sustainable love. There's so much here that I think that has to be dealt with. And the relationship with Daryl, I think, is that first turning point. Well, maybe Harry almost too, but like with this relationship that you experience with falling in love, and what does it mean to feel love? Not a sexual, although that comes into it, but it's about a true love. A love that comes into both Daryl and then also for yourself, that then you can learn to love and be a father and be an uncle and be a land protector. Because without that relationship of love, learning to love yourself, you can't turn, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important fact. I think like one of the big processes writing this book, and kind of having to come to terms with, was the fact that I spent my entire adult life, my adult career, with this really powerful source of energy and motivation, and I think it's one of the reasons why I've been so manic over the years, and and when it's go time, I go and I don't stop until I achieve what I've been told to do. And and that motivator was this super dense, highly concentrated, you got to think about it like the most dense thing in the universe, the neutron star. I had one of those inside my tummy, and it was all of the hatred and fear and hurt and shame and just every interaction, whether it was interpersonal, institutional or interpersonal or internalized of racism, but what I discovered in my later years as an organizer, as a campaigner, as somebody, in the public eye and talking to the media and doing all this crazy ass shit, is that if you work from a place of hatred and anger and fear, eventually it begins to consume you from the inside out, and you start to turn into the thing that you're fighting against. And so I had to hit reboot, restart and really take a different take on things. And, one of the things that putting this book out and talking to people about it has taught me is that I got to approach life, not just work, but life from a place of love, and it sounds cheesy as hell, but, it's very true. And I wish I figured this stuff out like in my teenage years or in my 20s, but it took me until now, in reflecting on some of those pure instances in my life when I did have some exposure to the feeling of pure love, like, connection. You mentioned Daryl. That was like the one two-spirited kind of experience I had in my life. I pursued this famous Winnipeg DJ as a youth, and not to like for sexual purposes, but I think I was kind of in love with the dude, and I just thought he was the coolest, most stylish, and best dancing. He was also Cree, and it was like super confusing because I am a straight, cis kind of person, but probably a little queer, I guess. I don't know.
I've said that all of us are. You've described me absolutely perfectly. I've been in love with my best friend for my whole life. And he's a Ukrainian guy, and I tell him all the time. To be Anishinaabe or to be Cree, we didn't have homosexuality or heterosexuality for that matter. We had our own ways that we had relationships with not just people but the land. And it wasn't a sexual relationship, but it involved sex sometimes, but it involved an intimacy that our everyday life involved relationality with all things, and I would say that we are as much in love with the water as we are with a person. And so that means that we spend time with both. We give our bodies to both.
It's weird, you reminded me, I was on a fast one time and I made the stupid mistake of asking to be put out in the middle of this back 40, like no trees anywhere. And it was like Lakota style. So they put you out like in a broadcloth and that's it. And no shelter, nothing. And oh gosh, it was like 30 degrees and sunny. And after about the second day, my entire body was just like blistered and red and I was sunburnt. And I remember I was praying to the earth and I was like, oh, please, mother, help me. I'm so hot. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. And then the earth was like, I'll cool you off. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah. And then I remember I took my hand drum stick and I cut through the prairie sod. It was about this thick. And I cut a piece about the size of a human body and I ripped the sod off. And then I got underneath and I pulled it back on me underneath the prairie and I hid under there until the sunset so I wouldn't burn anymore. So yeah, it was very intimate and very loving, and I don't even know how to explain it, but yeah, you reminded me of that just now, Niigaan.
I want to read. Do you mind if I read just a little section, because I think everyone would get a really good sense of the book, or it's part of your ending. It's when you're talking about coming into your own clan. And I think for many non-native people, they might not understand that our clans they're like our umbilical cords to the earth. They're our teaching structures, and they give us these knowledges so that when we're watching the eagle, in your case, you're literally feeding yourself, like you're being fed, right? What you write on, and this is on page, for those of you that have books, it's on page 222. It says, as I've said before, the teaching that the Eagle clan must carry to the world is love. The eagle flies the highest and sees the farthest. I have much more to see and much more to learn, but what I can see from the modest height I have attained is that scared little kid that I once was, that bewildered little Cree kid who didn't know whether he belonged to Puckatawagan or in Winnipeg, who couldn't always differentiate between those who would protect him and those who would hurt him, who couldn't see the difference between anger and justice. From a certain height you see time laid out like space, like a landscape, and there is young, confused Clayton. And then you get into a section about talking about loving yourself. I'm actually choking up here because it's so beautiful. Because I think for many Indigenous men, but also for society at large, growing to love yourself, especially in this environment where we've been taught to be so ashamed of ourselves, to be different, to be divided. We're coming up to a Canada Day that's probably going to be bring a lot of sores and a lot of pain and a lot of division that has always been there, but is being talked about for the first time. For many people, it's the first time they're going to talk about these things. That learning how to love that part of yourself, which we've been taught not to love, is one of the hardest journeys of all. And this book is really about that journey that you've taken as a model for all of us.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, as Niigaan mentions, I was blessed with a thunder being name. In English, it means strong Thunderbird man, and my spiritual family is Eagle Clan. It was interesting. Some old guy told me, he said, that's why natives are so fucking confused today, because everybody's snagging their clan cousins, and that really has an effect on your mental health. Geez, I wish people would figure out who their clan is before they snag. It was really funny, but it's true. We have our blood family, and you don't snag with your cousins, and you have your spiritual family. And anyway, I don't know what I was trying to say with that, but yeah, being Eagle Clan though, I find myself up in the sky all the time, and it really shows. And I really acknowledge all the loving other clans in my life, all the characters and friends and supports and stuff in my life, because yeah, with my name and my clan, like I'm always like, oh yeah, imagine we could achieve, we could do this and all of that. And then my A-type personality friends, my Bear Clan friends and shit are like, well, yeah, but it takes work to get there. So here's what we got to do. And so,
yeah,
but
as a Fish Clan person, we're the ones doing all the thinking. We're the ones thinking through all of you come up with the ideas, but we have to figure out how you're going to get there. That's what the Fish Clan people do.
Right on.
I just think it's a beautiful way to end the book, and I wanted to share with you another reader response because I just really appreciate it. Let me just grab it right here. Of course, my father calls just as I'm about to pull open a quote, so my phone just turned off, so that was great. How is one of the last things that a reader wants to know is, how has the memoir been received by your family or your friends? And what I really want to know is, how is it received by your children? They're still young, but maybe, frankly, I'm not sure I would want my daughter to read some of the traumas. If I will eventually, hope maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I'm writing my father's book, and sharing some of those stories with our family has been hard. It's been hard because people are nervous. They feel like we're bearing some of our secrets. What are the ways that your family and friends have received the book?
Well, I've said this a couple times now in some of the talks I've done on it, but I really wish that Life in the City of Dirty Water had like a really happy ending, like a fairy tale ending, and like in the movies or something. But I'm still alive. I'm not dead. I certainly ain't that old, and I got a lot of life left. I wanted to inspire a conversation though, especially in my own family. And so it was a mixed reaction. It was very difficult for certain people in my family to have this story come out, to feel exposed, and like I said, I really tried to do my best to not put anything in there that was going to re-traumatize other people that I care about, that I'm on this journey with. But there were other people like Roddy, for example, I think probably is the most notable one that, I did approach him, and I offered him, I said, if you work with me on this storytelling project, we could do something beautiful. We could, and I believe that we still could, but we could, Roddy was one of my abusive fathers growing up. He used to really beat my mom a lot. And, and I told him, I said, we could go out there and talk to people, talk to other Native men about how we're trying to make right, on the way we were conditioned, and how we're trying to decolonize. And but he just wasn't ready to go there, so but who knows, maybe he will be down the road, and I'll leave that door open. if we could do that work together, I'd be really excited about it. And I think that for my children, this has been a very difficult process. As I had mentioned, my family has paid a very high price for my work, and the choices I've made in my career, being part of the movement. And, I spent my whole life growing up saying that I wasn't going to end up like one of my uncles in the American Indian movement, with 10 kids and, and like leaving all the kids behind on the side of the trail of the longest walk, And I said that I would be there for my kids, and I would, my father wasn't there for me, and I would be there for my kids, And it was really wild, after the Keystone XL campaign, we won that campaign. It was huge. But I remember my son Felix, telling me, yeah, Dad, all I remember of my experience, my childhood, he's 16 at the end of the month. He said, all I remember is just you would be there, and there would be all kinds of candies and cool like stickers and t-shirts that you can't buy in stores, like from Indian conferences. And then all of a sudden you'd just be gone again. And then that was it. And it'd just be mom and me. And it just really struck me. It really affected me. And then, like I said, my partner and I separated right before the pandemic because this brought out a lot of depression and a lot of like, I relapsed pretty hard on the alcohol during the pandemic and, had to get help with that and, and quit drinking. And, and it was a real challenge. And so, it's a mixed bag that the boys have been dealing with. And then on top of all of that, the books in their school libraries, and so, they share with me. I would say that it's an active, ongoing conversation that their mother and I are having with them actively because experiences pop up on a daily basis for them. And they're already, even without the book, my kids are stressed out by Dad all the time because, everybody in their school knows who I am and, they're all the teachers. And I mean, I swear it was a liberal conspiracy. My kids' schools and Jim Carr's writing. And so frickin' Jim Carr, when he was the Minister of Industry, would be reading to my kids every week at their school and like interacting with my kids and like, and I'm showing up protesting this guy at his office over pipelines. And there he is, reading children's books to my kids and even with Justin Trudeau, brings the prime minister there. And I'm just like, oh man. So yeah, my kids, like, it's an active conversation but they're, they've kind of like grown up, like since they were just babies, like I've literally carried them on the steps of Parliament with 20,000 people in front of us. And my son Felix grabbed the mic just when he's a toddler and hyped up the crowd. And, they're kind of used to it, but it's an active conversation that both their mother and I have to be very present for because, yeah.
Well, I can tell you how, I don't know how your kids and I don't know how your relatives and I know how I've reacted, my students have reacted. I mean, but I can also tell you I know how the country's reacted in that you were selected as one of the finalists for Canada Reads back in March. I wonder, do you have any things to say about that? Like, how was that experience? That's must be a very surreal experience. I'm a semi CBC employee, not just the Free Press, but I work for CBC in the different shows that they're on. Not a big fan of that format for doing books, but what was that like?
How do I say this and not sound crazy? I mean, Niigaan, you'll get it, and the native viewers will get it, but there's a really powerful thing about prayer. And I tell this to all the young people that I mentor, that I'm sitting at the drum with. I always tell them, you be real careful about how you pray and be very specific. Like, don't say some dumbass shit like, Creator, give me power or give me strength, because the only way you get strength is through suffering. And, Creator will will answer your prayers, So you got to be very specific about what you pray for because the power of prayer is incredibly strong and it will manifest. And so, like 7 years ago, I remember smoking my pipe and praying when I began writing this book. I prayed and I didn't pray to win, because, that'd be like praying to win bingo. It's not ethical. But I prayed that my book could be part of Canada Reads so that it could get out there and touch as many people as possible, both native and non-native, so that it could open up a conversation with the 60,000-foot question that it poses. And that is, what is it going to take for us all to heal, to move through the violence of colonization and to heal? And more pointedly, what is it going to take for us Indigenous men to heal, to move through the violence of colonialism and to heal from it? And, now I find myself deep in that conversation, and I'm very grateful for it.
One last, if we can just, we are a little bit over time, but we've one last little thing. I think Erin has a question from the chat, which is apparently very bustling and very busy with people who are giving feedback. But go ahead, Erin.
Yeah, so we had one watcher ask, what are you most proud of? Which I know is a very difficult question, but I think it's a good way to maybe end the night. So what are you most proud of?
My children. Absolutely.
And your relationship with Niigaan.
For sure. No, my kids, hands down. Yeah, like when my first son Felix was born, and there's so much stress that mothers have to deal with, and parents too, just collectively, but mothers especially, just around the first act. They call it latching. The first time baby latches to breastfeed, and it's so fucking stressful because it's like, will the kid latch? Is the kid gonna latch? Is there gonna be problems? It's like this whole thing, and we were so stressed out. And I could have literally got shot right there on the spot and died and felt like I had won, this thing called life, when Felix, my boy, the first time he latched. Because in the 70s, if they didn't convince women, Native women, to get abortions, then they would do fucked up shit, like ask them to not breastfeed. They would say it was not natural or healthy. And they would, I was one of those kids who they convinced my mother that breastfeeding was wrong. And then I was raised on formula. And to this day, I've got serious issues like psoriasis and things that in my conspiracy brain, I'm always like, it's because I didn't get breastfed. And so to see my kid breastfeed, it was an act of colonial resistance, and it was like healing one of those negative cycles of trauma and abuse that came with colonialism, and replacing it with something that was positive and life-giving and restorative, and it just, there's just been instance after instance after instance of my children, excelling and going past anywhere that I could have ever have hoped to achieve to have gotten at that point in my life. And they're just these incredible balls of sacredness and light and humor, and they're kind of both assholes too, which makes them even funnier. I don't know. Yeah, my kids.
Well, savvy readers will have recognized, just like I just did. I'm like, I've heard this story. And then I go, where is it? And I was like, oh, page 197. There it is. So the story, that it really is true that this, sitting and getting this book is kind of like sitting with Clayton yourself, hearing his humor and his tone and his cadence and all the different things that are, I was like, I've heard this story before. And I went, oh, yeah, I bet you it's in the book. And then I quickly just I wrote breastfeed into the search engine, and boom, there's the story right there. So just a real honor, man, to hang out with you again. And, I'm really happy that I'm able to do this on behalf of a place that I deeply love, which is the Free Press. I just really love that place. I really believe in what we do there. And I really just honored that you get to be a part of this. And, the other thing is we haven't really seen each other physically for 3 years, but yet I've hung out with you lots. So I don't know what that's about.
Well, I'm very grateful for this time. I really want to encourage everyone. There is a North American tour that we are planning on doing that was postponed, unfortunately, due to COVID. But I do a live stage performance with all the different media that we've produced for Life in the City of Dirty Water, and just some singing. Like I sing R&B and do some drum songs, and it's a really cool performance, but it's followed by just an open space to have a conversation about that 60,000 foot question, Yeah, well, so if you want to follow up when we actually finally get to do the tour, or for, you know, academics or educators, you want education resource materials, you know, just go to lifeinthecityofdirtywater.com. And that's where you can keep up with the project, because it's much more than just a book. It's a whole entire three-dimensional transmedia storytelling universe, an ode to Winnipeg, our great city. And you know, I really want y'all to stay in touch. You know, we need everybody's help. You know, in my day job with 350, I work with an incredible team here in Canada, across these lands that they call Canada. And you know, we're really trying to get our economy off of fossil fuel and to transition to renewable energy. And there's so much good that comes with that, including an end to these never-ending wars that our planet is being terrorized by. And yeah, so on Wednesday, this week, Wednesday, we got a national day of action to end climate delay. So follow 350 Canada on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. We also even got a TikTok now. So, and do follow me as well. And if you ever have a question, don't feel for, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm usually pretty responsive on social media. So.
And I can attest to you, and we've been chatting all day on messages. Clayton's great for getting back to you. Although now I guarantee people are going to start reaching out and inundating your Facebook Messenger / email. Huge miigwech, Clayton. You know, and I've been waiting all night to say this. Let's go then. Let's go then.
Let's go then.
Go then. Let's go then. Okay. Anyways, so a big miigwech and thanks, and I just want a huge thanks to Erin and to Chris for helping organize this for tonight, giving me another opportunity to talk about this incredible book, which I've recommended to everybody. I think we're teaching it in 3 different courses at the U of M in my department this fall. I'll hand it back to Erin right now. Big miigwech for coming tonight.
Oh man, thank you guys so much for that discussion. That was incredible. I know Chris wanted to say a quick word before we sign off, so I'll pass to him for a second first.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to thank you, Clayton. This was an amazing book. I think that one of the reasons I found it so amazing is I've been reading a lot of Indigenous authors in the last number of years. And so I feel like as I've come to your book, and I've read it now twice, I'm just ready for more of it. I understand more of it. I have more of a context that I'm coming to it. And I'm not the only one who's listening to these conversations like tonight and reading books. I can attest to the last decade of sales of Indigenous authors are really on the rise, and people of all kinds are reading them. And you talk about the young people, and I just think there's got to be some hope there somewhere. And I know there's more Indigenous authors come because I've already seen the fall list, and I know they're there as well. So we're getting ready for even more. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm so excited about all of the incredible Native writers that are coming up and out now and putting stories into the world. You know, I always say if there's one thing Standing Rock taught us, it's that Indigenous peoples don't need the corporate media or white intermediaries to translate our stories for the world to take them up en masse. And we're seeing that now with this cultural revolution happening in all media sectors. And so, yeah, it's really exciting. You know, big shout out to some of those writers out there. Jesse Wente, Unreconciled. Make sure you pick that up. My dear friend, you know, author of 5 Little Indians, the winner of Canada Reads, Michelle Good. Make sure and check that out. Niigaan has got a bunch of amazing books he's put out that you should check out. And I really want to shout out one writer in particular, Tasha Spillett. She's writing children's books here in Winnipeg. She's based out of here in Winnipeg. She's like a professor, educator, daughter of like one of our most prolific matriarchs in the city, Leslie Spillett. But yeah, she's got some incredible children's books, you know, so for all you parents out there, make sure and pick up Tasha Spillett's children's books. The one I like is They Sang You Down from the Stars, I think it's called, but yeah, so.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book, absolutely beautiful. Well, that is it for us tonight. I will mention quickly that our summer book is And Then Is Heard No More, which you can't see because my background is blurred. Just a reminder, we don't have a meeting in July. We'll meet with this in August, and you'll get an email all about it tomorrow morning. Thank you all so much again. I know we went a little bit over time, so I really appreciate you spending the time with us, spending the space with us. To Chris and Niigaan and Clayton, just one of the best discussions I think we've had. So thank you so much again. And we will see everyone in August. Good night.
Hey, everybody. We'll talk again
Take care,
soon.
everybody.